Vladimir Putin?
Okay, Putin is probably not an INTJ.
Ride the bear.
Hey there, welcome to Typevolution. This video is my first reaction video, so please bear with me. I have been studying Jungian personality types since 2013. I started my first blog in 2015, which is called viptypology.wordpress.com. And there I've been typing lots of different people, fictional characters and celebrities, and I've also been typing people personally, one-on-one, in typing sessions, so to speak, since then. And in 2017-16, around that time, I also created a second blog, which is called typevolution.com, and there I go more into depth when it comes to the theory itself. And you have to know there are different interpretations of Jungian personality types out there. So there's the MBTI, of course, there is Socionics, which is a system that originated in Russia, and then there's Big Five, and Big Five is supposed to be the most scientific, but it also has traits and certain traces of Jungian psychology in there, so you might even think that's a certain kind of interpretation of Jungian personality types as well. And I've also been studying another personality type system called the Enneagram, so I'm like really full of all of this, so to speak. And I actually typed Ben Shapiro on my blog in 2017. I'm gonna disclose what I typed him as later in the video, so stay tuned. And I have to say, unfortunately, that 16 personalities test is rather surface-based because it's mostly about the letters and it's relying on Big Five, but not really, and it's just a bit messy. And it's very common that people mistype in this test. So I also think that Ben Shapiro got mistyped in this test. So based on my experience, based on my expertise, I believe that the best typing you can get is by taking a test with a professional, with someone who is some kind of expert, or some kind of guru who can go with you through the questions and answers and actually knows what it's all about. Especially someone who, in my opinion, has also in-depth knowledge on the functional theory and socionics. I am gonna talk with you about the ways how this personality test is problematic and my interpretation of Ben Shapiro's answers if we were in a session together. So yeah, and also I've actually watched Frank James' video in bits and pieces, and he makes a few points that I actually agree with, but I strongly disagree with his conclusion. So, okay, let's start.
Oh, hello. Welcome. Today, I'm going to be taking what is a newfangled version of the Myers-Briggs test, a personality test, to determine what my career should be. It's like I'm back in high school, so that's super exciting. Apparently, this new version breaks down your personality in a variety of ways. Apparently, there are 4 categories. There are analysts, diplomats, sentinels, and explorers.
Those 4 categories are problematic, actually. So the problem with these categories is that they are still based on certain stereotypes that are outdated, especially when it comes to J versus P, judging versus perceiving, when it comes to conscientiousness. And I made a video about this problem before, you can watch it here. So yeah, the ideal categories would actually be NF, NT, SF, ST, because that's the most functional, so to speak. But let's just continue. This is, I have to say, I have some expert knowledge, so this might fly over your head if you are not familiar with the theory.
I enjoy vibrant social events with a lot of people. No.
Sigh. Okay. I actually also made videos about extroversion versus sociability. I also wrote a blog article about it. This is a big pet peeve of mine. And this is something that both the Big Five and this test and a lot of MBTI people get wrong. So extroversion and sociability are not the same thing. Okay, so extroversion is mostly about whether you are primarily focused on receiving, taking in, and judging information in the external world. So your focus is on the external world, the world outside of yourself. This is extroversion, external, outside. And introversion is the opposite, where the main focus is on the internal world, the internal judgments, perceptions, and so forth. So it's a lot more subjective, and extroversion tends to be more objective. Anything besides that is related to what I call the social instinct, the social drive, and also to some extent feeling. So the types who tend to be oftentimes more stereotypically sociable are in MBTI EF types, so ENFJ, ESFJ, sometimes also ENFP, ESFP. However, besides that, the social instinct really determines whether you are going to be more focused on the social domain, whether you're going to be more interested in partaking in social events in the social sphere. If that instinct is not your first instinct, if it's not your main drive, then you won't be able to relate to this. And also, if you're a thinking type, you most likely won't be able to relate to this as well. So yeah, I think, based on that answer, Ben Shapiro is not social instinct first, and he is not a feeling type. That's just obvious. Okay. But that doesn't mean he's not an extrovert. Before I even continue with this video, you can just tell by his energy, by his talkativeness, the way he pushes his energy outward. It's much more stereotypical of extroverts. So if I had him in a session with me, just based on his outward behavior, like his baseline, normal behavior, he's most likely an extrovert. It's very easy to tell. I can also compare him to Jordan Peterson. I believe they're both on the same wavelength. They're like mirrors to each other. And Jordan Peterson is much more obviously an introvert based on his energy, based on how he projects himself into the world.
The Bible starts from the premise God exists and he created the universe. Aquinas starts from, we have a universe, what says God is there? And he says, well, when you go all the way down deep enough, there has to be a force that lies behind the combined logic of the universe.
And I was talking about this Christian idea too. So I've been thinking about that statement about no one comes to the Father except through me. And I thought, okay, well, what does that mean exactly?
But okay, let's continue.
You often rely on other people to be the ones to start a conversation and keep it going. Disagree?
Yeah, disagree. This is a common trait of extroverts. They tend to be the initiators. They tend to be the ones who are more in tune with the external environment because their mind is not so much set in their internal world. It's much easier for them, and they tend to initiate conversations more and so forth. To be fair, people can learn this trait. They can make themselves do this. So even then, I would not necessarily say this is a very, very strong, valid reason for extroversion, but it is a trait, and I actually agree with this to some extent. Once again, this actually suggests that he's an extrovert over an introvert, despite his aversion to some social events.
If you have temporarily put your plans on hold, you make sure it is your top priority to get back on track as soon as possible. Strongly agree. We're just going to go full extremes here.
He's the kind of personality type that is very much focused on long-term range, long-term planning and goals, and also being as efficient as possible, wasting as little resources, as little time, as little effort as possible. Types who have extrovert thinking as their first or second function. So that would be ENTJ, INTJ, ESTJ, and ISTJ.
It would be a challenge for you to spend the whole weekend by yourself without feeling bored. Disagree. If I have books.
Yeah, so this does suggest that he has a lot of mental activity that does not necessarily require an outside stimulus. So this tends to negate extrovert sensing. So extrovert sensing people in particular have the tendency that they need a lot of outside stimulus. So physical stimulus that is affecting them in that manner. And so that would be ESTP and ESFP, and to some lesser extent ISTP and ISFP. Whereas intuition types, intuition is a different kind of perception, a different kind of metabolism of how you perceive the external environment. And especially in this day and age where you can look up things online very easily and quickly, where there's lots of information available, lots of books, you can easily pick up on patterns, trends, information without actually engaging with a physical world that has a physical impact on you and your senses. So this also suggests he's likely an intuition type.
You're more of a detail-oriented than a big picture person. Strongly disagree.
Yeah, this is a stereotype that mostly fits ISTJ and MBTI. Basically, IST types, especially those who are conscientious. But there can be some who are not. So this is also a trait that rather asks for sensing and conscientiousness. So
You're very affectionate with people you care about. Shockingly strongly agree. I have children, guys. I don't like you, but I like my kids.
yes, okay, so this is like a mix of introvert feeling and I would also say the sexual instinct, so bear with me, but introvert feeling tends to very much favor friends from foe. Like they're very specific. They have a very clear inner and outer circle usually. When they are extrovert, it's a bit more flexible, but especially I would say his dual or his complementary opposite tends to be the kind of person who has a very clear inner and outer circle and is very, you could almost say judgmental, critical about who they let into that circle. So he is reflecting that in the sense that he's most likely someone who values introvert feelings. So he has as one of the first 4 functions. And if you put on top of that the sexual instinct, so in the other theory, the sexual instinct, yeah, it's about procreation to some extent. It's mostly about fusion, merging, combining forces, combining powers together with a mate, and really close bonding usually. And like he said, he has children. So the sexual instinct, without going into creepy territory, it can also extend to other kinds of people, this kind of strong bond, this kind of merging or like almost two becoming one, which can be unhealthy at certain levels, but anyway. And so with his children, he has like this very strong, intimate bond, so to speak. And this is like the mix of sexual instinct, which I believe is his first instinct, and introvert feeling. Extrovert feeling tends to be more gregarious. They tend to be less focused on, you know, their inner and outer circle. Of course, there are also different dynamics here, so I'm talking generally here. So this is also a sign that he's most likely favoring introverted feeling over extroverted feeling.
You often find it difficult to relate to people who let their emotions guide them. Agree.
Who let their emotions guide them. Yeah, he obviously is not a feeling type, so this is pretty obvious.
You can stay calm under a lot of pressure. Agree.
Can stay calm under a lot of pressure. Could just be a matter of confidence versus insecurity. So I wouldn't say this is necessarily a very strong signifier of anything.
When in a group of people you do not know, you have no problem jumping right into their conversation. Strongly agree.
Yeah, once again, this is actually both a sign of extroversion and thinking, you know, because types who tend to be introverts or who tend to be feeling types, they are much more delicate about how they go into situations in the external world. Of course, once again, there can be a few exceptions. But yeah, so, and also the feeling types are much more aware of what could be appropriate in the emotional atmosphere in order not to disrupt it. But he clearly doesn't care about that. He clearly doesn't care about whether he disrupts a certain emotional vibe or atmosphere, which once again is a sign that he's a thinking type and a sign that he does not have extroverted feeling in one of his first functions.
You usually lose interest in a discussion when it gets philosophical. Disagree. That's actually when it gets good.
Okay, this is also another pet peeve of mine. There tends to be this assumption that S-types are not interested in anything abstract at all, or, you know, or who are not intellectual at all, or, you know, who are very close-minded, very simple people, and this is not necessarily true. Yes, S-types tend to lean more towards this kind of mindset, but especially in combination with other personality traits, there are some S-types who are quite open-minded actually, and who actually also enjoy philosophical discussions. Because on some level, you have to know that S-types actually crave intuition to some extent because it complements their sensing. So sensing types are unconsciously always on the lookout for someone who can provide them with intuitive insight. That's also why many people mistype as N even though they are S, because they think, also this test believes that if you are interested in those things, if you are open-minded, open to experience in the big five, that it means you have to be an N-type, which is not necessarily the case. It's not a matter so much about what you like, though of course that plays a role. It's about how proficient are you at this. With NT and SF types, the focus is really on theories that are both abstract and both of a technical nature. So this often translates into things like, astrophysics, for example, or other kinds of theories of that nature. It can also go into other theories, such as business theories. And so this is common for both NT and SF types. So then the question is, okay, how can you tell which one the person is? One of my questions in my test, I'm paraphrasing here, but tell me one of the most innovative or interesting or futuristic theories you have or ideas you have that would improve the world. And oftentimes people who are sensing types do not have a sophisticated theory that would translate to true innovation. It's not, I mean, of course, once again, there can be exceptions, especially if the person is highly intelligent. But so things like that, like you have to measure this. You cannot just be like, oh, do you like this or not like this? Because that liking something does not necessarily mean you are good at it. That's the point. And with Jungian types, also the strength of something matters, not just what you like. Basically, before I continue, I can say that he obviously is proficient at theories, at factual knowledge. So that alone would make me think he's most likely a T-type and T-type. But let's continue.
You cannot imagine yourself dedicating your life to the study of something you cannot see, touch, or experience. Major disagree.
This is just a sign of intuition over sensing. But once again, there can be a few exceptions. If someone is a sensing type and very open to experience, there can be a certain exception here.
You often make decisions on a whim. Disagree.
Making decisions on a whim, being impulsive, tends to be more a trait of someone who is extrovert sensing, first or second. So this would be ESFP, ESTP, and to some lesser extent ISFP and ISTP. ISFP and ISTP because they're introverts and because extrovert sensing is not their main function, they might not do this as much. But so this is mostly a trait of extrovert sensing types. But even then, they can learn to be a bit less impulsive. But especially the types who tend to be the least impulsive and the most strategic and most calculated in what they do are INTJ and ENTJ, and to some lesser extent INFJ and ENFJ. These types tend to be really calculated. But once again, especially ISFP and ISTP, because their third function is introvert intuition, which is connected to this kind of thing, they can train it and learn it. So,
The time you spend by yourself often ends up being more interesting and satisfying than the time you spend with other people. Strongly agree.
Strongly agree. Obviously, as an intuition type, this is rather common. Also, if you tend to be surrounded by people who do not match with your personality, you're going to feel the same way as well.
You often put special effort into interpreting the real meaning of a message of a song or a movie. Agree.
I think this question is poorly phrased because once again, it's about liking to do something and not about how good is the person at this, how sophisticated is their insight or answer. So people who like introverted intuition, the type who have it in MBTI is one of their 4 functions, are gonna enjoy this. They're gonna find this interesting. Even other types might find this interesting, But then it's a matter of how good or how sophisticated is the person at gathering this meaning. And a good example, I would say, is Jordan Peterson. The way he analyzes movies and tales and so forth is a sign of very strong introverted intuition, especially boosted one, in combination also with logic. So I think, Jordan Peterson's INTJ, introverted intuition subtype. So he's a good example of a person who is good at this. But just liking it is not necessarily a good indicator. However, I do get the impression that Ben Shapiro would be good at this. So I would still say, okay, this could be an indicator that he's an intuition type.
To focus on present realities rather than future possibilities. Yeah, I agree.
This is actually something that can test whether someone values extroverted sensing or extroverted intuition, because people who have extroverted sensing as one of their first 4 functions tend to be more focused on realities. They tend to be more focused on what can be accomplished in the physical real world. Whereas types who value extroverted intuition tend to be more focused on what could be, and the practical realization of an idea is not that important, or it's at the second level. People who value extroverted intuition, like ENFP, ENTP, INFP, but also ICJ, ECJ, EZJ, and ISFJ, and MBTI, they are more interested in ideas. Okay, now I'm jumping to his result.
The architect, INTJ. Wow.
You knew it.
Okay, everybody in the room is like, called it.
Okay, so you got INTJ. That's actually not a bad result. I think this is actually pretty good for this personality test. It happens to be, luckily, a pretty close result to what I think his type is.
Vladimir Putin.
Okay, Putin is probably not an INTJ.
Ride the bear.
Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Also Arnold Schwarzenegger, I don't think so. I think Putin is probably an introvert, an IET type, an MBTI. I haven't looked too closely at his type, but yeah. But I don't think INTJ. I would say some kind of sensing type. Arnold Schwarzenegger, I also think, is rather an extrovert, actually, most likely a sensing extrovert. So this is also false. But let's go into the description of it.
Architects at school are often called bookworms. Those with this personality type.
First of all, I think architect is a poorly chosen word. I would not call INTJ the architect, especially because it conjures an image of someone who is actually an architect. And I would argue that most architects are not INTJs. They are most likely sensing types, because you're literally looking at the physical construction of something. So yeah, architect, maybe if it's like supposed to be a metaphorical term for like designing your life, then maybe architect's okay, but I would not call INTJ the architect. I actually have a description of INTJ on my blog, typevolution.com, and I call INTJ the strategist. I think this is a much better description of the combination of introverted intuition, the foresight, with thinking, with a good grasp on thinking and logic. So yeah, this is why I call INTJ the strategist. And I also have a pet peeve with the term bookworm. So, well, all introverts can be bookworms, and even some extroverts can be bookworms, especially EN types like ENFP, ENTP, ENFJ, ENTJ. So this is not, I would not mention this in the description.
Fair. I mean, it's better than not knowing Like, what's like?
Extrovert thinking is a lot about knowing. It's to know, to gather as much valuable, efficient, factual, relevant, reliable data and logical information as possible. So this is extrovert thinking.
Did you see this study that was from the CDC that came out that, again, for the second straight year, life expectancy in the United States dropped? So you had consistent life expectancy increases in the United States for 150 years. And now, for the first time in modern American history, life expectancy has now dropped for 2 years in a row. And that's specifically due to 2 phenomena. One is the increase in heroin overdoses, and the other is suicide. Suicide is now at record rates in the modern era. And we had 70,000 heroin overdoses, opiate overdoses last year. I think it was 50,000 the year before.
I pretty much think that this is actually his first function.
These are facts, and facts don't care about your feelings.
Okay, all right. I went enough into this. So my diagnostic, so to speak, by the way, I'm not a licensed typer. I'm not a licensed therapist or psychologist or whatever. So, but my typing would be ENTJ. So I have no doubt that he's actually an extrovert. As I described in the video, it's rather apparent that he values extrovert thinking, introverted intuition, extrovert sensing, and introverted feeling. So this is the stack in MBTI for ENTJ, and to some extent also in Socionics. These are his valued functions. And the functions he's the best at would be extrovert thinking and extrovert intuition, based on also Socionics theory. And I think it's pretty apparent that that's the case. So I actually have a description of ENTJ, who I call the entrepreneur, on my website. I call him the entrepreneur, extrovert thinking plus intuition. By the way, each title always has certain, associations with it. And the problem is, of course, there are entrepreneurs who are not ENTJ, right? There are people who are different personality types who are that. But I think that this personality really encapsulates what an entrepreneur is. It's really archetypal of this personality type. All right, so this is my take on his personality type. If you have any more questions or comments, I'm really curious to hear about them. Yeah, so that's it. If you want to get typed by me, you can find the link down below. And please like, subscribe, comment, share, and all the good stuff. All right, have a good day. Bye.